Richard Hanania, welcome to the Realignment.
Glad to be here. Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming.
Richard, the premise of this show, we started this whole thing out about a year and a half ago or so, and it was predicated on the idea that Donald Trump's election in 2016 was ushering in a grand political realignment, that this offered new opportunities for the GOP on economics, that there was a rethinking around trade, that actually economic issues and economic livelihood, the free market fundamentalism of the GOP itself had been stabbed in the heart. Now, the Trump presidency and how he governed just did not turn out that way. And I thought, and so did Marshall, I think, is that before this election, I was like, oh man, he's going to suffer a big price for not delivering on some of these promises on trade and on China and more. Then he got more votes. He actually got more votes than he did last time. He did even better in some working class districts than he did before. And so I'm like, well, what the hell is going on there? And then I read this paper that you and a guy named George Hawley have authored. And it's about how actually that entire economic thesis, the national populist thesis, which we have promoted heavily on this show, is just completely not true. So let's top line that a little bit. What did you find in your analysis? How did you conduct that analysis? First of all, remember you're speaking to a general audience, so just try and contextualize it for them. But why is the working class GOP a myth, as you put it?
So, what we're doing is we're not reinventing the wheel in political science and people who look at data. So people have been studying political opinions and why people vote the way they do and why they party identify the way they do for decades. And there's always been, a finding that goes back, like I said, for a really long time, in that you cannot really predict people's voting based on their economic circumstances. You think maybe that makes sense, but it doesn't work like that. It's in the common parlance we'll hear, the elderly care about Social Security and Medicare. Yeah, they do, but the young like Social Security and Medicare too. It's very high. There's a lot of this. There's a lot of this research on issue by issue. And so fast forwarding, just going to the last couple elections, it's not a new story. There's not been any kind of, realignment in this direction. Economics was a poor predictor of how you voted before 2016. It was a poor predictor in 2016, and it was still a poor predictor in 2020 from what we know. And if you actually, and the people, and, specifically to the claim that Republicans are the working class party, which is said by people like Rubio, people like Howley, people like Cruz, who are trying to sort of will this thing into existence. If you just, if you had to pick out one party as the working class party, who won under 50,000 a year, it was actually the Democrats. Now that's correlated with race and all kinds of things. So, they win more blacks and Hispanics, but Republicans aren't even necessarily the white working class party. So even if you just compare whites to over 100,000 to, significantly less than, less than that, like 30,000 or under 50,000, you might find a few points in Trump's direction, maybe 5 points or something. But out of all the other things in the world, it's not a huge predictor. And it's also conflated with education. Now, when you look at degrees, then you see a big gap where the college educated, and this is sort of new to the Trump era. It's not a working class realignment. It's more of a sort of cultural realignment, where people who have college degrees are becoming, whites at least, are becoming more Democrat. Who knows if that'll stay with Trump? It might not have actually applied down ballot. So the Republicans did better down ballot in sort of these suburbs where Trump also just could be a Trump effect where, the people without college degrees really like him and the people with college degrees really hate him. And besides that, everything's pretty much the same.
The key thing that you said is that there still could be a realignment. That's all that matters for the show's brand perspective. So that's very, 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 very important. But seriously, though, let's do this year by year. I get your point about economics not mattering to people. But from our show's perspective, Sagar and I really think back to August of 2015, when Donald Trump, then candidate, says things like Jeb Bush wants to cut Social Security and Medicare. Jeb Bush is in favor of cutting taxes on wealthy people you don't like. And you saw Steve Bannon dive into this too, in many ways would be happy to increase taxes on the rich. That's the rhetoric that definitely got the working class GOP narrative really spinning. What does that rhetoric and that historical story just told you mean in the context of your data point, though?
So, I mean, going back to 2016 primaries is, very interesting. So, Trump won the primaries, and the question, one interpretation is this was a rebellion against trade policy, or this was a rebellion
Right.
against, entitlement reform. I think it was probably more immigration, because immigration is just such a huge predictor of how people vote. And this was pretty much Trump's signature issue from the time he came down the escalator. I think it consolidated a lot of sort of not elite GOP, but elite media figures like Ann Coulter just went all in on Trump and just attacked everyone else. So I think it's probably the immigration issue, if anything. And then I think one thing that backs this up is if you look at who finished second place in the Republican primaries, it wasn't Jeb Bush. They weren't buying that, even if Trump wasn't there. It was Ted Cruz, pretty much the most conventional, Republican GOP. I think he's made some overtures to populism in the last few years, but at least in 2016, pretty much a conventional Reaganite. So it's a question how much these issues matter. My theory is that Trump and Cruz were just the two people who triggered liberals and triggered Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell more than anyone else, and I think that was enough. I don't know how much these issues actually matter. A lot of this is just attitude, and to the extent issues do matter, I think I would be inclined to explain it more in terms of immigration rather than trade policy or whatever.
I want to dive into that immigration point, because what you just suggested is that if Donald Trump had run against Social Security privatization, the Medicaid stuff, all the more economically populist things I just described, your comments suggest that if he attached that critique to also being in favor of the DREAM Act and comprehensive immigration reform, it wouldn't have worked at all whatsoever. So can you go deeper into the immigration as a determinant of votes on the right?
Well, I just am trying to imagine that scenario. If he was pro Dreamers, path to citizenship, and a liberal on economic issues, the liberal media would have loved him, and his fans probably wouldn't have developed that connection for him. I think he would have just been a liberal in that case, and then the whole dynamic of sort of triggering the libs wouldn't have even worked. I mean, we looked at it. So, for example, in our paper, one thing we do is we look at GOP congressmen, right? And we can actually, there's, databases that track votes, and you can see where they are, how far to the right are they, how far to the left are they on, and so you could look at this, sort of this model, and you could see where they are in space. And one thing we wanted to check is, do Republican politicians who are closer to the center on economic issues, do they actually do better in the reelection? And we find no evidence of that. Once you control for how the partisan lean of the district, it doesn't matter if you vote more in accords with the Democrats, go a little bit more economically populist. It's just the immigration issue. I mean, it's so huge because it's one of those predictors. It's like you can ask people, you can look at what people's bank accounts, you can look at their profession. You can look at, even there was one study which looked at their attitudes toward free trade and tried to predict it based on how subject to competition their industry was. And it wasn't a strong predictor. Cultural concerns, right. How you felt about foreigners in general was a better predictor. Even how you felt about free trade, much less how you voted.
So you said something. Yeah, 1 second. I want to make this point because you and I were talking on Rising this morning, and you were talking about some specific industry level data, and this just tears a hole in my heart. But you were like, look, I mean, even in industries that are impacted by foreign competition, that foreign competition doesn't actually impact voting behavior, just showing you the primacy of the culture war. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so if people are interested in the reference, the lady's name is Shahrazad Sabet, Sabet. She's I think affiliated with Harvard, and she did this study. It's called Feelings First, so you can find the paper online. And actually, so it's basically, what she found is she goes industry by industry, and when people had strong feelings about foreign influence on the country, cultural, that predicted their that predicted their views on trade. And then, but only when they didn't care about either way, so people are sort of in the middle and wish-washy, then she found an influence of trade on their attitude. So it's something that's there, and it could be activated. A lot of things in politics could be activated. It's just a question of all the forces in the universe. What's actually driving people? the story we tell in the paper, and we think it's consistent with the data, is that basically most people are just partisans, and that's getting more solid. It's there were some great focus group stuff where you would tell people actually what Paul Ryan wants to do to Medicare, and they just don't believe it. Like, it's like, even if they do this stuff, they don't know, and like they can't believe it. Like, they don't want to believe it, and so most people are just partisans. They're just going to interpret all the data. Like the how well do you think the economy is doing? It varies with partisanship a lot, right? As soon as Biden won, the Democrats became a lot more optimistic about the economy. And then you have that, you have some swing voters. There's fewer of them than I would have thought. I actually, if you look at like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and like the difference between 2016 and 2020 and all that's happened. And I thought the coronavirus, just Trump's approval rating on the coronavirus was down, and plus Biden being a more likable candidate than Hillary, I thought there would be more of a shift. I believe the polls. I thought maybe it would be a 5-point victory. Exactly the same. Yeah, you shifted 1 or 2 points of all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so that's it's pretty incredible. I might have even underestimated the partisanship, but to the extent that there's a few people who vote on economic issues, it tends to be economic results. So things like how fast the economy is growing. This is one of Trump's strengths, actually. If you polled people on their economic situation before the coronavirus, it was pretty good, and his handling of the economy always remained well. It's not specifics that they know, like when there's a negotiation between him and Pelosi, who wants the bigger deal. I don't think people are even paying attention. It's just like, okay, if I'm the kind of person who's not partisanship, I'm in that swing voter. What's going well. It's not even my class, right? It's just like, I'm watching news, who seems to be doing well.
That's the fascinating part, Richard. This is what I could not wrap my mind around, is when you were like, it's not even about my personal wages. It's not even about how my family now is doing. It's like, when I watch the TV, whose economy seems to be better. And that feeds into this thing. It's like when people are like, hey, well, gas prices went down, so I voted for Trump. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, the president literally has no impact whatsoever on gas prices. But, and look, I don't want to discount this. People vote the way they vote. I'm never going to shame somebody for it. Yeah. Which is that when you look at the GDP top line numbers, I actually think that these deficit hawks, who I've made fun of now for years, are onto something. Which is that when Trump is like, well, look at the GDP and look at the stock market, that shit actually translates, it turns out, to a lot of voters and how they vote on the economy.
Push back. Quick thing. I want to push on that, Sagar, because
go ahead.
The argument that and Richard, I want to get you on this because we've been talking about politics, and I want to focus on policy for a second. The argument that the debt and deficit hawks and the tax cutters make is that those policies create specific results that then help. You're
Trump. Totally right.
It's not, I don't think anyone saw Trump talking about the stock market, and that translated into a better thing. So can you talk about that dynamic?
You're exactly right. Go ahead, Richard.
Yes. So, in the political science sort of jargon, it's called sociotropic voting. So it's more social, right? It's how is the country doing overall rather than my situation. I think that's right. I think nobody. So, it's very simple to look at polling data, and some of the people, populist right, have done this, and some people on the far left have done this too, like Bernie Sanders, who looks at the data and say, oh, people support a $50 per hour minimum wage or whatever. You can find some very funny poll results. People will support very, very left-wing things. Actually, Paul Krugman, it's funny like how necessary this is. Paul Krugman tweeted after the election that, Trump won Florida by, some big number, 5% or something. And then Florida also overwhelmingly passed a $15 minimum wage by referendum.
We've talked about that a lot here, right?
Yeah, and he's like, I'm confused. Well, if you took it like an intro class to political science, you really wouldn't be. It's really not something that should blow your mind if you've paid attention to the data of these last few decades at all. So I don't think any like tax cut, supply sider is foolish enough to believe that their stuff polls well. It clearly doesn't, and anybody can show that very easily. The better case for them is the economy grows, and you could look at Reagan's success in 1984. People weren't enamored with free market fundamentalism back then, but he degraded in 1984, one of the best results ever. That's the smart case for the free market policies, that they expand the economy, everyone is better off, and then you end up actually helping the GOP.
Let me put it this way. Their marketing is fantastic, right? So that's the part that I think I missed, which is that when they're talking about growth, that actually strikes a nerve that I didn't think was there. Here's something I have my chart in front of you. This chart, I haven't been able to get this thing out of my head for like 2 weeks, which is impact on Trump warmth among U.S. whites.
Yeah.
And let's go through this. The highest, most correlated one is reducing immigration. And then income is all the way on the very end. And so that suggests that the economic case, you said something on my show earlier, which I loved. You were like, yeah, I mean, the truth is a lot of immigration restrictions are not like are not like economically consistent around wages, which suggests that the driving force behind their argument when they talk about wages is kind of bullshit. So can you go into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, a lot of people who don't like immigration look for a PC reason not to like immigration. And so wages is sort of safe. It's not gonna get you canceled. I mean, if you, like you could just take any one example. I like Tucker Carlson's show. He talks a lot about wages and immigration. He's not that interested in other things that have to do with wages. He's not interested in, oh my God, the Republicans just passed a thing that made unionization more difficult. He's just thinking about immigration.
I will speak for him. I actually think he would care a little bit more about unionization, but I think that's a fair critique against some people. Go ahead.
Yeah, you might be right, but people. I mean, economists disagree on immigration and wages, and it's not like the average person is sitting there looking through the studies and looking at the Cato reports versus the American Compass reports and seeing who's correct, right? So, what you buy about what the story you tell about immigration is sort of predetermined by your sort of cultural attachments. The way I think about it is that if you are, let's say you're poor and you're not doing well in life, the world is so complicated. The number of explanations are infinite, right? So there's not some obvious thing. Some people will tell you it's the rich people. Some people will tell you it's white privilege. Some people will tell you it's immigrants. Some people will tell you it's capitalism. And there's no way for like just a normal person to just sort through all that. So these how we feel about economics tends to be interpreted in this way. So people who just are uncomfortable with immigration for cultural reasons will come to believe that it hurts wages and this and that. And people who like sort of the see themselves as anti-racist and woke, right, we'll see it the other way. We'll interpret the economic data that way. So it's easy to get fooled and sort of take the surface for the real thing, but you sort of just have to dig a little bit more into things and see what predicts what, and what's the result of these regressions of these different kind of statistical models to sort of get an answer and to separate the stuff out.
Could you talk about what this means for the grand populist narrative? I'm thinking back to February 2020, right before coronavirus. Sagar is smiling. You can't see his video because that was at the height of basically the rising populist narrative. Bernie's crushing it. Sagar thinks Trump's going to beat Bernie. There's this big argument about how we're going to have this populist left, populist right come together to challenge plutocracy. What does everything you're saying mean for that narrative? A narrative that, Sagar, you and I have poo-pooed on for the past while, but it just seems like this is really the final stake in that idea.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the Sanders temptation. If you think Sanders is the best candidate, you look at him and you say, well, his stuff sort of matches with the polls, and Sanders supporters will say that, but when Bernie Sanders, when he won one of the primaries, I don't remember which one it was, or when he lost one of the primaries, he came out and he said, "Oh, the stock market went up because I lost." Yeah. Like, oh, haha, look at all the capitalists against me. It's like, that's not like, you can't just become president and then the stock market keeps crashing and then you say, great, like, because my stuff polls well. So it was such a demonstration of how you're sort of not getting how it works in real life. I think that. I don't want to be too negative on the populist vision. I do think there is, I don't like dogma. I don't like this idea that where we just look for the free market solution and whatever we find, we don't have to ask questions anymore. I think that some people, but if you see populism as sort of a way to get into power, if you think it's populism, is economic populism, or these more populist views are actually good for the country, my data would say, go ahead and do it because it'll actually have good results. So it's not saying don't do populism. It's just saying don't be fooled into thinking that by adopting these populist positions, you're going to win elections, because it might have no influence and it might actually hurt you if the policy doesn't work out as well as you planned.
See, this is the fascinating thing, and this is why I'm really what depresses me about this is I just see how easily this is co-opted by people within the establishment, right? Is that like, if you can brand economic populism as working with the left and being a liberal sellout, it doesn't matter if your policy is going to help your voters or not, they're just not going to trust you. I mean, one of the things you pointed out is that it seems to me to be a GOP primary victor, you have to be hated by the media, which is basically what Ted Cruz and Donald Trump had in common. And that their underlying policy, as you point out, between Cruz and Trump was dramatic, but they kind of did best, which tells you that overall attitude. Here's the question. Is there a way out of it? I mean, I know that, when you're looking at the data, and if you were to see like a slip through, what would it be? Because I guess what someone like me, look, I'm not going to stop caring about my economic positions, but like I'm not stupid, and I think that these are not as politically popular as I once thought. Is I'm looking, if I read your data, I'm like, well, look, if I want to increase and change the GOP's views on unions and wages and more, you basically have to be the most hardcore culture warrior on earth. Then after you win, you appoint all of the right people. But after you do that, could it then change voting behavior? What do you think?
It's so interesting. You say that Cruz and Trump are these two people, and they have such different views, and sort of how amorphous the anger is I think very interesting. I when I came to age and started paying attention to politics, the first things you wanted to own the liberals of was not supporting the Iraq War. So you'd say you guys are surrenderers, and it was the same people who then became the Tea Party. I mean, the same basic voter base and the same people, and this were the same people who went to Trump. So and these things have so little in common. But the policy people who get appointed stay the same. The judges stay the same, but sort of the mass message is just different. And I don't want to just single out the right here, though. I mean, the left is driven by
we'll get there. Don't worry. We'll beat up all over the left in a second. Yeah.
Yeah. So what to do? Yeah, I think being an effective culture war advocate is the way to do it. What I find when I watch politics is a lot of the people who are sort of most hardcore on the cultural issues are sort of not the how to put it nicely, not the smoothest politicians, don't have necessarily the best presentation. And so they might not have broad appeal. They might be bad for winning general elections. Some of these people, they don't do well in actual elections. But if you could combine, somebody who's charismatic, somebody who can, take these cultural issues, but not, sort of make a fool of himself in the process. I'm not a GOP strategist or anything, but if I was giving advice, it would be something like that. And then the economic stuff, I don't want, and also I would also add that there is some evidence that the economic appeals can be effective if they're direct and simple enough for people to understand. So writing a check and mailing it out to people, that'll work. I would not suggest taking away people's social security checks. It's not like nothing matters, but like, okay, I'm going to raise tariffs and I'm going to increase your, among people in this industry of 3 years down the line, and people are going to vote on that. No, that's not realistic. I think one thing is interesting. I mean, one thing that the left actually does is they do things, and the right does this in reverse, and they try to undo it. Is for example, empowering public sector unions, right? Those are a base that's going to be there for them. People don't vote. There could be when you have something like a union, you have that sort of social monitoring, and you create this sort of like group identity. Also, I would say the left, the way they do racial classifications. I'm an Arab, and so I'm considered Caucasian because our lobbyists weren't as good as Indians and Pakistanis who got into the Asian category.
Sorry, Richard. Sorry.
Yeah. So the Biden administration actually has something very fascinating where he wants to disaggregate the Asian category because Asians look good in the aggregate, but if you were able to take out Laotians or whatever, you'd have more people who can sort of have a stake in the welfare state. And so Republicans do this in reverse when they go on union busting. They don't really resist the race stuff all that much. They prefer not to think about it. So there is room to creatively think about. Don't lose track of the idea that the cultural stuff is important. You're not going to just be able to adopt Bernie Sanders' platform and say, I'm a Republican and get everyone to vote for you. So keeping that in mind, but also you can be sophisticated at sort of looking at these direct methods to help people, direct methods not to harm them, and sort of creating conditions that create new bases for your voters and taking away voters from the other side.
I want to pick up on something you said around do culture wars the smart way. Because I'm incredibly skeptical that, especially with the current class of Republican Party politicians, it's something on the table, quote unquote, smart culture war politics. An interesting example in an NR piece you recently wrote that we'll put up in the show notes was you talked about how, look, in California, very blue state, affirmative action is pretty resoundingly shut down. So hypothetically, that could provide a path forward for Republicans. But what I suspect, I'm just thinking out loud here, is that affirmative action was shut down because the state Republican Party is just so atrophied that in a weird area, people could just look at the affirmative action question in a sort of nonpartisan way and say, hey, do I like it? No. But if there had been a successful Republican Party in the state, if Trump had been actually viable in the state and the issue was identified as, hey, if you're pro-Trump, you want to ban affirmative action, and if you're anti-Trump, you want to support affirmative action, I suspect it wouldn't have passed in California. So how do you think about that broad context?
Yeah, you're thinking a lot, but that's actually a good point. So I guess my advice would be different whether I was trying to help the Republican Party, or I was trying to help the affirmative action cause. If I was trying to help the affirmative action cause, I would try to do exactly what happened in California, try to get on the ballot in a blue state where Republicans don't even exist, and try to keep it under the radar. If it comes on the radar and it becomes like all good Democrats have to the fact that they weren't paying attention is a good thing. So maybe Republicans taking up this issue would actually be bad for the affirmative action cause. Affirmative action is so unpopular, though, that I think that if Republicans took it up, it probably would be good for Republicans. And it's hard to say for the issue, depending on how the election turned out. If they ran on affirmative action and then won, there's a lot you can do in the executive branch to take. But if you run on it, you run on it and then you lose, Democrats can be more excited about pushing more affirmative action or whatever. So it's risky, right? I think you're right. Nonpartisanship is the best thing. There's fascinating research that Congress passes laws all the time, but even the last few years, they passed bills on like sex trafficking and the opioid crisis, and it gets bipartisan support. And it just happens if it doesn't sort of become part of the circus, if it doesn't become part of the culture war. As soon as the president champions an issue or it becomes a major thing and a major debate, then it becomes much more difficult. So it depends on if you care about these issues or if you care about the party. If you care about the party, you want to think about these things in a careful way. If you care about the issue, affiliating with the party might be the worst thing. Maybe the worst thing you can do.
And I want to follow up a quick point here, because I think you're really right to point out that affirmative action is this uniquely, probably unpopular policy issue that even in a blue state is going to have issues. But think of immigration. Right now, this moment, immigration is the most popular it's been in a very long time because of the fact that it's associated with Trump so much. So how do you think about and once again, I'm not asking you to be a Republican Party strategist here, but how should any Republican think about that issue? Because they will say, well, look, immigration activates our base, but then at the same time, when it's tied to the way it was tied to, you get the child separation crisis, you get the unpopularity of the issue, and that happens. So how should any office holder or activist think about the problem?
Yeah, the thing is, it's a two-sided coin. So when I tell you culture drives politics, I'm telling you this is what's going to drive your base of Republicans, but it's also going to drive the Democrats. Now, one thing the Republicans have going for them is sort of the map of the Senate and the map of the Electoral College. Trump was a lot more competitive than you would have thought just based on overall popularity. So they do have these advantages. The polling on this stuff is really strange. So the polls. Really underestimated Trump's support, particularly in the Midwest. It repeated what happened in 2016. So it seems like there might be, and actually 2018 in some of these races like Josh Hawley and Mike Brown in Indiana, they underestimated the Republicans there too. Joni Ernst, there's something.
Susan
going
Collins
on
everywhere. Yeah.
Susan Collins, in the Northeast, but in the Midwest, that was the weirdest one of all actually. But it was very, very just consistent to the Midwest. And so you would see these things during the George Floyd protests. It was like, whites used to overwhelmingly oppose Black Lives Matter, and now they overwhelmingly support it. I looked at that and said, wow, the culture might have really changed. So this is going to be a disaster for the Republicans. They don't even have that. It's like we're polarized, but one side is just swallowing the other. The election comes around. It looks exactly like it does in 2016, except 2 points, in this state or that.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know about this immigration. Even the polling, even just the polling itself, it bounces back. So after the George Floyd stuff, there was just a poll in Morning Consult if you ask people like how much they support police right after the George Floyd protest, it went down a lot. And then, but in 26, a recent poll showed it pretty much the police had bounced back and the criminal justice system had bounced back just as much approval as it had in 2016. So what's going on? Maybe public opinion is just like, really like, it just like sort of bounces around really fast, but then it sort of, when the thing recedes from the headlines, it goes back to its natural state. There was one paper, I wish I remember who wrote it, but it actually showed this, that public opinion changes through generational change. So basically you can see short-term changes, like people will become more concerned with racial justice after one police killing, but then it basically bounces back. Eventually public opinion does change, but it's a very long process, so it's not like that relevant for 1 or 2 elections. And so, I would not take the polls seriously when they seem to suggest that liberals overwhelmingly dominate on these issues, that now they're Republicans are in a minority, particularly in the states where they need to win. They still might be solid here. It's a cost benefit. There's no easy path. That's the problem with a polarized country. There's no magic bullet to say I'm going to adopt this cultural issue and I'm going to win, because there's always a reaction and there's another side to it. It's just very hard.
Richard, you're an expert on data, and you're basically telling. Can we believe polls at this point? I relied on them so much before the election, and I believed their BS, right? Like they were like, well, last time we didn't sample enough educate, and I was like, oh, I believed it. I was like, okay, it seems reasonable, right? For why you missed this and sample size and oversampling this and all that. And it turns out these cranks I follow on Twitter who are like trying to debunk the polls were actually a lot more correct than they were than like the actual pollsters. So just would you advise our listeners, me, Marshall, others who are looking at this, how do we look at polls, especially around issues like this?
So, it's complicated. So you could say, these cranks seem to be right in 2020, these people who seem to be engaging in wishful thinking. Well, in 2018, they were completely wrong and the standard pollsters were correct. The standard pollsters had Democrats winning the congressional ballot by like 7 points, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. And Rasmussen was the only outlier, had a tie to Republican +1. And they were completely wrong. So it's important to take sort of a more long-term view and just look over time. 538 does a lot where they try to look at it over time, and what they basically found is, on average, going back, as long as we have data, I think they go back to, I don't remember, the 50s or 60s or something like that, maybe the 70s, I don't know. But basically, the average of polls ended up being 4 points off from the results of the popular vote. And if you look at the 2020 result, it's going to end up being 4 points off. The average had about Biden +8. And it's going to end up being about Biden +4. So they're not terrible. if you're just going to listen to one thing in the world, the thing is, what's the alternative? The alternative is wishful thinking. If I give you this thing that's on average within 4 points, and sometimes a little bit higher, and sometimes it's exact, like it's right on point, I would take that over, people engaging in wishful thinking. It's just the alternative is not very good.
That's a good point.
Now, in the Midwest in particular, they had a problem. So sometimes you have a problem with one community or one area. And the idea behind 2016, people were saying, well, they didn't sample enough non-college whites. So they try to get a sample, right? You try to get so many Hispanics, so many Blacks, so many college, but they didn't do college or non-college because before 2016, it didn't matter. Whites with college and without college didn't really vote that differently. In 2016, they did. In 2020, they did. So they corrected for that. And they were still off. Now, what David Shore says is there might be a problem in that, Republicans, there might be a certain kind of Trump voter, a certain kind of Republican who has distrust in institutions. And so even if you're getting enough college, non-college, those, the non-college who are answering their phones or who are talking to pollsters might be different than those who are talking to pollsters. And so why you can see this systematic, and there's no easy way to correct for it. It's not like you can find, it's not like it's easy as just get more non-college respondents. So it's a difficulty for polling. I still think polling is, there's no alternative, and it's not that bad. Don't take it as, gospel. Some people said there was a shy Trump vote and people were afraid to talk to pollsters. I don't think that's true because it underestimated Republicans everywhere. And Susan Collins was like the polling on Susan Collins was more off than anywhere else. And I don't know if voting for Susan Collins is that scary? Admitting that, is that scary to people? So the main case they're gonna have to look at for a while. I don't know I have no clue what went wrong there. But yeah, I would still take polls. I would still take polls as still the best in town, and I would not take somebody seriously just because they got 2020. Every single one of those people, look what they said in 2018, right? And you'll see that they're just saying the Republicans are going to do better than the polls, and sometimes they happen to be right, but sometimes they're going to be wrong. And and it's not like they're always biased against the Republicans, because in 2012 Romney didn't do as well as the polls said, so they underestimated
That's right.
Obama. So next time, they might underestimate the
Who the hell knows,
the
man?
Democrat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The question is what the alternative is. I mean, I would just go back to that and say, until you've got something that over time can even get within 4 or 5 points in an election, that's the best you can do. I would take it even a mixed view on polls. I would be even more skeptical though of the ones on things like criminal justice reform and things like that. I think there's they're never tested. So when there's an election, there's always a test, and you can see how they do over time. There's never a referendum on Black Lives Matter, right? And then you can see are the polls good or not. So there's no system where you can get closer to the truth and know if you're getting the right balance or whatever. And the results from the 2020 election would make me think that some of these things about the country moving to the left on these issues were probably exaggerated and probably not correct. We just don't know.
So
excellent point.
As Sagar promised, we're going to get to the left in the last half of the show. But I'm realizing something. I want to know what you think about it. If I'm understanding what you're arguing correctly, many of the arguments for economic populism aren't standing up to the actual results that we're talking about here. But what I'm curious about is what happens when economic populism intersects with a culture war issue. For example, something many right populists argue is for the past 30 years, part of the reason why the right has lost every single culture war is because the right, while losing power in academia, entertainment, corporations, etc., has lost all that power. They've also refused to use the power of the state to advance their ends. So a good example of this would be the antitrust debate. I know quite a few Republicans who are now interested in antitrust against Facebook and Google, not because they're truly interested in overthrowing the Borkian idea that we do antitrust based on consumer pricing, but because they think that these corporations hate conservatives, they want to use government to attack them. How do you think about the way the GOP is now thinking about economics when it intersects with that culture war example?
So, I think that this is something that I think it can lead you down a blind alley, because I think it's a little bit.
We specialize in those, so thank you.
So the reason Republicans and conservatives care about Facebook and Twitter, like you said, is because they think they're being treated unfairly on these sites, and I think they are. I think that's true. And the idea is you'll just unleash antitrust and somehow you'll harm them. Yeah, if you just want to harm, you can do it. You harm them. But I was reading about the actual some of the stuff that's going. The antitrust stuff that's going after Facebook, and it tends to be things that Democrats would have supported 5-10 years ago. It's just standard antitrust.
Yeah, I know.
Right? And so but there's so much directly you could do on the cultural issues, particularly from the executive branch. The entire, for example, the affirmative action state is basically is executive order. You can look at just going back to LBJ and Nixon. And there was, some steps towards doing something, the diversity, the critical race theory training. You can actually go much further than that in the Trump administration. So, I think if you're concerned with cultural issues, just fight the cultural issues. Don't think you're going to have tariffs and that's somehow going to restore the traditional family. Maybe it will, but if you like the traditional family, advocate for that and give tax credits and subsidies or whatever to make that happen. I wouldn't try to do it in this sort of indirect way. It gets captured too easily. I think it's sometimes cowardice. I think people are afraid to talk about these issues directly. So it's sort of a safe way to signal, what you're concerned about. But I don't think it's effective, and I don't see, any evidence that it can be effective.
Quick follow-up to better precisely state my question. Has Republicans' attitude towards the use of government power shifted? Because that's what the argument is. The argument is that the Trumpian moment has made the Republican, which in their eyes is working class base, more comfortable pushing back against the libertarian idea that you shouldn't use the state to advance your ends if those ends are conservative. So that's the direct question I'm asking.
Yeah, so as far as the base, I don't think they ever had a problem with using government to accomplish conservative ends. I don't think that's ever been like a base issue. And so the question is, did Trump sort of shift the activists and the elites? Probably not. I would say the rhetoric is a little bit different, but if you look at,
Right.
Trump's appointments and actual policies, the greatest or the most important legislative accomplishment was the tax cuts, and then the other ones they tried to do is repeal Obamacare. It could have been any other Republican president doing that stuff. So I think rhetorically there's a lot going on, but policy-wise, I don't see it. That as far as the base or the general public, I don't think they ever had a sort of ideological opposition
Right.
to power. It's just I think that's pretty much unchanged.
But the good thing about what you're saying, though, Richard, is that you're not saying that they are like in favor of it. What I'm reading is like, I don't really give a shit as long as you like are throwing, like as long as you're talking about the issues the way that you're supposed to. So okay, we promise we're gonna dunk on the left too. You're here to myth bust the right, and I think you've successfully myth busted everything I've been saying for the last 2 years. And it's not even like I can really counter it because I basically agree with you. Let's talk about the left then, right? So one of the things that drives me insane is when they're like, Medicare for all is like a 99% issue or something, right? They're like, you can't find an American in this country except a healthcare executive who believes in Medicare for all. And I know the Bernie listeners who listen to this podcast are going nuts. I'm sorry, guys. Let's myth bust some of the things what you were talking about with Bernie Sanders, which is that let's say if the progressive left is so popular on paper, then why do Democratic voters not like Bernie overall? Or at least, why do they not vote for him? And why do they vote for a guy like Joe?
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about the Democrats is, we said that the Republican primary in 2016 was just about who would trigger the left. Democrats actually tend to trust their leaders and their institutions, and there's polling that backs this up. So the South Carolina primary was the big one, and around that time, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, they saw it was going to be Bernie, and that there was no other option. It had to be Biden, and all these people dropped out, and it actually worked. So the part of it is just Democrats just sort of trust their institutions. That's why Bernie, can't break through. He had, that 25-30% committed base, and maybe, we couldn't get it much past that. I think you're right. I think it's just, the most simplistic thing you could do to just look at what people say in polls and then try to sort of shape a political agenda around that. I think they're smart to like get this stuff on ballot initiatives, like to the extent they could do that. That's smart because you'll end up winning that. But like we said, it's a cult. There's a cultural sort of a stigma or a sort of there's associations that people don't like. So, if Bernie went to Cubans in Miami and, said, oh, look, they agree with me on minimum wage and they agree with me on health care. Like you have nice things to say about socialism. That's all that matters. That's all they care about.
Yeah.
They're not going to vote for you. So yeah, people, overestimate. I think, it's like, it goes back to, it's like a Marxist idea really, that everybody's politics can be explained by their, class position. And we've had, since Marx, we've had a lot of examples of very wealthy socialists, and we've had a lot of examples of societies where the poor people have been sort of more bastions of conservatism. So I think there's this idea that you can make sort of politics scientific. It all comes down to material factors. And I think that's I don't think that's the right direction for either side of the aisle. Because when you think about it, the people, when they vote, they don't actually influence the outcome, right? I mean, your one vote does not influence the outcome, right?
Yes.
So you are not. If there was like, I pay you like $200 if you voted your interest, that might actually work. But you have something like a 1 in a billion chance of influencing the actual election outcome. So what does that mean? You don't think about it too much. You're basically trying to express something when you're voting. You're trying to express solidarity, because if it's rational, you just wouldn't do it at all, because like I said, odds of changing are zero. So to see it as sort of more a social activity or something that's expressive and cultural more than economically based. Now there's lobbying group and interest groups and people who are more economically motivated. I'm talking about the mass level.
Right. No, and this is what we have to separate, which is that there's the elite level where what you're talking about, elite opinion actually influences policy more than anything. This is something I have come to understand, which is that it's almost entirely disconnected whatsoever from the general populace. But then how the general populace interprets that and more is the question that we're trying to solve here. And so, I mean, a more basic form of what I'm asking you is like, what are the central theses that the progressive left gets wrong about politics. If there's the right-wing national populists, what they got wrong is thinking that economics was key to Trump's victory. What did the progressive leftists get wrong most about politics?
It's basically the same. It's basically the same thing, right? It's the same mistake. We're gonna do the things that seem popular, which is go left wing on more economic things, and there's it's much worse for some people on the left, because it's like they refuse to acknowledge the other side even has ideas. Like, I mean, I listen to them sometimes, and they're just like, oh, the billionaires want this, the billionaires want that. Like, I don't think Charles Koch just wants to protect his wallet. He's put a lot of money towards things that make him no money at all, like foreign policy, for example. I've been a recipient of some grants from Institute of Me, and said, I see no way that Charles Koch benefits from a less interventionist American foreign policy, right? He just believes it. So even the wealthy people who are influencing politics to a great extent care about ideas. And so I think that, it's almost like the side that's losing tends to adopt this thing. Is tough to adopt this. So I mean, I think the left they think we just I mean, there's the neoliberal left that goes more in on identity issues and just ignores the economic issues. And other people say, no, you actually have to talk to people and talk to their economic circumstances. And yeah, they're just wrong. If they were correct, Sanders would have done very well. Even if you look at the level of approval for people like AOC and Ilhan Omar. Look, if it was that simple, where you translated from people's positions to how they supported politicians based on those positions, those would be some of the most popular politicians in the country, arguably. It's sort of like on the right, there's an equivalent thing where some people go really hard on the immigration issue, and the immigration issue used to be much better for Republicans polling-wise 5 to 10 years ago. The problem is when you go hard on that immigration issue, you start getting media coverage which says, wait a minute, does this guy have ties to the Klan? Is he some kind of Nazi? Right. Yeah. And any benefit you get from
Steve King's name. Just don't erase Steve King. Just name Steve names.
Never. Whatever benefit you get from the immigration issue is more going to be swamped out by the negative associations with Nazis and Klansmen. And some of it is hysterical and stupid, but people have those associations. Just like on the left, whatever benefit you get from the economic issues makes you seem sort of out there and a leftist and sort of anti-American and maybe bad for business. And these associations people have, they can backfire. I'd recommend people look at on Twitter or just read his stuff. David Shore, who's sort of doing what I'm doing, but a little bit on the left. He's looking at the data and saying, you people on the far left who think you've got the key to winning elections, it's off. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that I think we're at a point where both sides are sort of making almost the same mistake. Just with different variations on it.
I want to pick up on something you said before we take this to our last section on polarization, which is your point that most actual Democratic voters trust institutions, because there's this whole segment of the Bernie left who is all about the rhetoric of, oh, the DNC primary was rigged in 2016, and oh, Obama made some calls, right before South Carolina. What they are doing is they're importing rhetoric which makes sense in the Republican Party, aka in the Republican Party, everyone hates the institutions. Everyone hates John Boehner.
The RNC.
Like, it's funny, we're seeing, I haven't actually read Molly Ball's biography of Nancy Pelosi. She's a good reporter, so I'm not going to say it's just fawning, but it's definitely a positive biography. No center-right reporter is writing a positive biography of John Boehner. In 2014, it wouldn't sell a single book. That's the key. So what they're doing is these young people are and I'm not surprised that young people distrusting institutions more on the Democratic side than the older, like boomer voters, but they're making this mistake. Do you think that as this generational change happens, because that was another really interesting point you made, as the Democratic Party ages down as, silent generation and boomers eventually leave the stage, will the Democratic Party also become anti-institutional? Or are we just letting very hyper online Gen Zs and millennials sort of shape my view of how young people see institutions?
Yeah, I think there's something to that generational change. So we have a post up at CSPIcenter.org just this morning from Eric Kaufman looking at the black vote and looking at difference in age demographics. And it's quite striking. I mean, if you ask people what party they identify with or if they identify no party, blacks, the oldest blacks are something like 80-something% Democrat, and the youngest blacks are like mid-50s, like 55%. So you have like a 30-point drop off in how much you associate with Democrat. Not that they're all becoming Republicans; they're just more becoming independent, and not liking the institution. And you saw the gap in Sanders versus Biden voting. Young blacks and Hispanics were more supportive of Sanders. So yeah, it's I do think you can get that generational change. It's it's interesting why the Republican Party ended up sort of this way, where like they have leaders, but they hate these leaders more than anyone else in the world. And it's like, a party in a democratic country. It's sort of strange. And maybe, that's a longer discussion. But yeah, I think you could get that with the Democrats. And I think that once you get that, I don't think it's good for our politics. I don't think it's good for our politics if both sides just will not listen to anybody in any position of power and just sort of hate their leaders. Now, what can happen is the leaders might align. So like, in 30 years, the Sanders' descendant, whoever that is, could become the nominee, and the party and the base actually care about the same things. The problem with the Republicans is their base and the elites in their party just are in it for different things. The base is in it because they dislike gender pronouns. They dislike affirmative action. They dislike changing demographics. And, the Republicans will talk a little bit about that stuff, but generally are afraid to, and they're in it for, tax cuts, free markets, expansive foreign policy. So this is sort of the and it's not even like because of the issues. It's because, the base still loves Trump. It's more they want to feel represented, and they want to feel heard, and they want to feel like somebody cares about their issues, even if otherwise you end up governing like Republicans traditionally do.
Just so interesting, man, about how exactly the difference between feeling and I wouldn't want to say reality. I guess like perceived reality can be from what is in Washington. And again, actually just goes to show where a lot of people, it's not just they're too online. I think they're like too here. They're just too in it to understand how it's actually being internalized on the outside.
You are like, if you're, if the people who listen to this show are in the top 1% of interest and knowledge about politics.
Right.
So you have a bunch of people in the top 1% or the top 0.1% of, political knowledge and interest talking to one another. You're going to overestimate the importance of issue, what actually people know. It's so funny. I saw Jeet here. He's a reporter for the New Republic the other day. He said he had a picture of when Feinstein hugged Lindsey Graham. And just is this the moment the Democrats lost the Senate? Like, no, it wasn't. I don't think 1 in 100 people, I would be surprised if 1 to 5% of the population even knew that happened. So yeah,
that'd be shocking. That would be really shocking.
That's so funny. It's so true. All right, last question for you here. You're talking about how we have the most polarized moment in a long time. I actually saw you talking a little bit about this, about civil war, right? Like, so Rush Limbaugh was like, people are going to secede and all that. And then I saw Amy Susskind be like, let Jesus land be and we'll reunite with Canada and all of that. I mean, put this in socio-political context, Richard. Are we actually that divided? Are we even close to any sort of violent confrontation? What do you think?
Those are two different questions. So are we that divided?
Okay, all right.
Yes. Yeah, we are very divided. Are we close to any kind of civil war? No. So I could go a little bit. There's good. I'm pretty confident in both of those. So I'm divided. You could just look.
Hopefully, I'm glad you're confident on the second one.
Sometimes optimism on these things doesn't sell as much as pessimism. It might be better if I told you, we're all going to be killing each other by the end of the week. But no, I don't believe that. So people dislike the other party more. You could see it in the rhetoric of elites, and you can see it just in how people respond to their feelings for the party. People are more likely than ever to say, for example, they'd be upset if their child married someone of the opposite party. And 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't find anybody who said that. That just seems sort of crazy. That's true. Now, civil wars, this is another one of my, areas that I've looked at the data, and they tend to happen in poor countries where governments are weak. They tend not to happen in rich countries at all. And if and people who study civil war will look at actually, you have to define your terms. And generally, they define civil war as something like 1,000 deaths in a year. Now, we have 1 or 2 deaths. It's something like, Charlottesville or something like that, and it's tragic. And people, when the Proud Boys and Antifa, they enjoy fighting each other in Portland. Maybe somebody dies sometimes. Usually they're just punching each other. That's a long way from civil war. And so, I don't think we're anywhere close to that. The government just, it works. The institutions, the police, the FBI, they work too well. if what you imagine one group like starts to actually commit violence, you be the one to get the ball rolling. I do not recommend that, just for not just morally, but for your own movement. You're gonna, it's a terrible strategy, because they're gonna come on down on you, and they're gonna come on down on you quick. So yeah, I worry about some things about the future of the country. Civil war, fortunately, is not one of them.
Mm-hmm. So here's the question, though. Everything I'm hearing tells me that the 2020s are going to be one of the lamest decades in American history. Nothing's going to get done. Everything that's even pretty medium or moderate is going to get sort of inserted into the culture war space. So it seems that I would sum that all up as we're going to have a lost decade ahead of ourselves. Hope that you're not so old that it wasn't going to matter for you. But that's my takeaway, because we get incoming listener mail, and some people say, Marshall Sagar, are you guys going to launch a PAC or start an activist movement to advance? And I'm like, dude, what do you nothing? None of that's happening. We could obviously make a nice Patreon off of it, but it wouldn't actually translate into anything with all these set of things. Because my last thing I'll add to this is, everything I hear you describing seems to be just incredibly difficult from a political perspective. If you're a politician of good faith, having to surmount the econ issues, the foreign policy debates that we haven't even covered, the polarization, navigating that would be so difficult. I just don't see anyone who could subsume these issues in the 20s. There's no Lincoln, there's no FDR, there's no, Reagan. That's the part there for me.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in that it feels like sort of Groundhog Day, and it's hard to, it's hard to see how we break out of that. So like Ezra Klein's book, I don't know if you've seen Why We're Polarized, you might have read it. Yeah, the thing he emphasizes, every actor in the system is sort of acting rationally. And he keeps saying that, and he doesn't really have a solution to it. His solution is basically, I think, something along the lines of make Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. states, and then,
change the chessboard. That makes sense.
Yeah. And that makes sense for him. Well, you got to get through the Senate now as it is. So good luck. You're stuck with that. I don't know. Like, I think there's dynamism in American society. I mean, some people have said there's positive things going on with the price of solar panels, electric cars, biotechnological breakthroughs. There was just a startup I saw on trying to get supersonic aircraft up in the air. There's exciting stuff going on. It's just not in Washington, unfortunately. And sometimes it actually, not having Washington screw with things, is actually things can take off. So yeah, I think there's dynamism in American society. If you look at the stock market and stuff, American treasuries, the people are optimistic. They think that things are going to go along, and people are going to have their pro wrestling politics. If you want meaning from politics, if you want it to be somehow beautiful or aesthetically pleasing or something that brings us on together, like this is like Obama's vision.
West Wing.
Yes, you will have a bad 10 to 20 years, I think. If you could just take a step back and just sort of look at society as a whole and sort of forget about politics, we might be okay. You might be more optimistic.
So for all the people on Capitol Hill who listen to this podcast, quit your job and go into the private sector. That's what Richard is trying to do.
Well, if you're one of the good ones, I mean, you could imagine.
Right. Sorry. Let me clarify. For those of you who are not there to post Instagrams about how cool you are for your friends back home while you're on Capitol Hill and are there to actually get any shit done, I would advise you to leave.
Well, I mean, one thing I'll just say that one thing I do worry about, though, is unforeseen threats that actually require a government response. COVID-19, I mean, is a clear example of this. We're screwed. So we just better hope that there's not stuff like that on the horizon that actually requires government, letting sort of markets and technology do their thing. If as long as we don't have any of those for unforeseen events, I think we'll be fine.
Well said, Richard. It's been an incredible episode, man. Challenged all of our priors. Just some really great analysis. Can you just tell people where to find you? Twitter, your organization, all of that.
Sure. Yeah. My Twitter handle is just my name, Richard Hanania. I have a Substack that's also just my name. And then I'm the founder of Center for Study of Partisanship and Ideology. Our website is cspicenter.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at CSPI Center, and you can find the report there where we talked about the national.
We'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll put a link to all of that stuff.
So that's just Twitter and cspicenter.org.
great,
Thanks for
man.
coming,
Thank
Richard.
you. Seriously.
Yeah, pleasure. It was great.